Ethan Cole sat in the cockpit of his fighter craft, staring at the star cluster ahead. The scanners were blinking with strange energy readings that no one could explain. Every system on the base had gone silent except for the alarms, warning that something huge was approaching. Ethan felt a chill, but he clenched his fists and focused. He had trained for moments like this. He had faced drills and simulations, but nothing could prepare him for the unknown. The colony behind him stretched across a floating platform near the edge of the cluster. Its towers shone under the light of distant suns, but even from here, Ethan could see the shadows that passed too fast to be natural. He adjusted his helmet and checked the readings again. The fleet approaching was massive. Hundreds of ships moved in perfect formation, but the sensors could not measure their strength. Every reading made it look like no human could survive the encounter. Ethan's mind raced. He had to understand this enemy before it reached the colonies. His commander's voice came through the calm but firm. "Ethan, stand down. Wait for orders. This fleet is outside our engagement range. Do not approach until we know more." Ethan shook his head. He did not need orders. He had seen too many attacks start too late. The colonies were vulnerable, and waiting would cost lives. Ethan fired up the engines and pushed the throttle forward. The stars blurred as his craft surged ahead, leaving the colony far behind. He checked his shields and weapons, making sure everything was ready. He would need speed and precision. The fleet ahead did not move like normal ships. There was an intelligence behind every maneuver. Ethan tightened his grip on the controls. He would be the eyes of the colony. He would find out what was coming. As he approached the first ship, the scanners finally gave a clear image. A human queen stood at the center of the flagship, her armor gleaming and her expression commanding. Around her, elite human men moved with uncanny precision. They were strong and fast, clearly trained for combat beyond normal human limits. Ethan swallowed hard. This was not a normal battle. This was a test of everything he had learned. The queen raised a hand, and the ships began moving faster. Energy beams lit up the darkness, and Ethan had to twist his craft to avoid them. The fleet's weapons were powerful, but there was something strange. Their formation was rigid, almost predictable. Ethan noted every movement, every turn, every firing sequence. He knew that if he could find a gap, he could strike. He had survived drills that simulated impossible odds. This was different, but not unbeatable. He dodged a sudden burst of energy and looped behind a smaller craft. He fired a quick shot that hit a shield generator. The ship shuddered, but did not explode. Ethan realized that the Queen's fleet was resilient, but not invincible. He could learn their patterns. He could survive this. Back at the colony, the scanners blinked in disbelief. Every reading showed that Ethan should have been destroyed. The system flagged him as missing, then detected movement in impossible positions. Ethan's heart pounded as he continued to observe the enemy. The Queen was powerful, but every movement was a clue. He studied her, noting how she communicated with her men and directed their attacks. He could use that knowledge to protect the colony. Hours passed as Ethan flew through the formation, taking careful notes and dodging attacks. His body ached, his hands cramped, but his mind stayed sharp. The fleet had immense power, but it had rules. It had weaknesses hidden in plain sight.
Goth.
Ethan smiled, feeling the thrill of understanding something no one else could. He was alone, but not afraid. He was alive, and he could make a difference. Finally, he pulled back from the fleet, returning toward the colony. He had enough information for now. The Queen's forces were terrifying, but he had seen the openings, the patterns, and the timing. He knew what he had to do next. The colony depended on it. The scanners at the base continued to show impossible results. Ethan was alive. He had survived the first encounter, and now he had the knowledge to fight back. Ethan Cole returned to the colony, his craft shaking from the maneuvers he had made. The energy readings were still unusual, but now he had a clearer picture of the enemy. The human queen on the flagship commanded her men with skill and precision. Each soldier moved like a trained machine, but Ethan had noticed the small gaps, the moments when they reacted slower. He knew he could use those gaps to save the colonies. As he landed, Clara Reed and Luke Hayes were waiting. Clara was checking a repair drone, and Luke was going over the battle simulations on a large screen. They looked up as Ethan stepped out, his face tired but determined. "You saw them?" Clara asked, her voice tense. Ethan nodded. "Yes, they are human, but beyond anything we have faced. The Queen controls them all, but they have patterns. They're fast, strong, and precise, but predictable if we watch carefully." Luke frowned. "We have never faced soldiers like that. Our weapons are strong, but their shields can take hits. We cannot." Ethan moved closer. "I noticed their formation. They move together, but they are vulnerable if we separate them. We can strike one ship at a time, take out their energy generators, and force them to scatter. It will take skill and timing, but it is possible." Clara nodded slowly. "Can upgrade the fighter systems and reinforce the shields. We need to be ready for their attacks." Ethan spent the next hours with Clara and Luke going over the recordings of the fleet. Every ship movement, every laser burst, every maneuver by the Queen's men was studied. They marked weak points and calculated the best attack strategies. The base was quiet except for the hum of engines and the beeping of scanners. Every person working on the defense felt the tension, knowing the colony's survival depended on their preparation. Night fell over the colony, but Ethan stayed awake, watching the stars. The fleet had not moved yet, but he could feel it coming closer. He remembered his first view of the Queen, her calm face as she directed her soldiers. Her strength was clear, but he had learned something important. Strength alone was not enough. Humans survived by thinking, by adapting, and by working together. He had to remember that if they were to win. Early in the morning, the first warning alarms sounded. The fleet had advanced, moving closer to the outer perimeter of the star cluster. Ethan, Clara, and Luke jumped into action. Pilots were preparing their crafts, engineers checked weapons, and the base hummed with controlled chaos. Ethan climbed into his fighter once again, felt the familiar tension of the cockpit, the vibration under his hands, and the rush of speed. Clara worked the shields while Luke coordinated the attack strategy with the other pilots. The plan was simple, but dangerous. They would divide the enemy formation and hit the vulnerable points they had identified. Every second counted. As they approached the enemy, the energy beams lit the dark space. The fleet had detected them, and the battle began. Ethan dodged a beam that came dangerously close, his mind focused on the patterns he had memorized. It fired at a shield generator on a smaller ship, causing sparks to fly and systems to overload. The enemy reacted, but too late. Another pilot followed his lead, striking another weak point. Ethan moved quickly, weaving through the chaos. He realized that the Queen was monitoring him closely. Her soldiers tried to corner him, but he used his knowledge of their movements to stay one step ahead. Every maneuver, every dodge, every strike was calculated. He was alone, but he was not powerless. The battle continued for hours, and the scanners at the colony could barely track all the action. Ethan and the other pilots had begun to force the enemy ships apart. The Queen's men reacted, but the human tactics were unpredictable. They had never seen humans fight like this before. Ethan smiled briefly, knowing they were starting to turn the tide. Finally, he pulled back after a successful strike. His craft was scratched and battered, but it still flew. The Queen had noticed the change in the battle. Her soldiers were not as coordinated, and small errors began to appear. Ethan had survived the first fight, and now he knew the enemy could be beaten. If the humans worked together and used every advantage they had, the fight was far from over. But hope had returned to the colony. Ethan Cole tightened his grip on the controls as his fighter darted through the debris of the battle. The fleet of human soldiers under the Queen had begun to scatter, but pockets of resistance remained. Each enemy ship was heavily armed and moved with precision that made dodging a challenge. Ethan knew he had to be clever. Strength alone would not save him. He spotted a small formation of enemy ships moving in a straight line, shield generators glowing. He aimed carefully and fired a series of shots that hit the lead ship. The explosion rocked the surrounding ships, forcing them to adjust their formation. Ethan used the chaos to weave through, avoiding laser fire that would have destroyed a lesser pilot. Every move he made was calculated, every escape timed. He had learned from the first encounter, and now he put that knowledge to use. Clara's voice came over the comm. "Ethan, we are tracking the energy spikes. You have a clear path to the rear of the formation. Take it." He nodded and angled his craft, moving fast but cautiously. He was entering the heart of the enemy cluster. The Queen's men tried to intercept, but Ethan anticipated their actions. Weaving through their attacks and striking at weak points, one by one, he disabled shield generators, causing small explosions that shook the fleet. Each success built confidence. The enemy was strong, but predictable if approached correctly. Luke's voice added, "Keep moving, Ethan. The Queen is focusing on you. She will not let this go easily." He could see the flagship in the distance, the Queen standing at the command deck, her eyes sharp and calculating. Her human men were surrounding her, forming an almost impenetrable wall, but even they had a rhythm. Ethan had memorized it. He could exploit it if he timed his moves perfectly. Suddenly, a massive energy blast shot toward him. Ethan rolled sharply, narrowly avoiding the attack. His shields flickered, warning him of damage, but his craft held. He realized the Queen had noticed him and was targeting him directly. This was the true test. He would have to strike, then retreat before she could respond. Every second counted. Ethan launched a rapid attack, weaving through enemy fire, aiming at the flagship's side. He fired carefully, hitting a vulnerable generator. Sparks flew and alarms sounded on the Queen's ship. Her men tried to counterattack, but Ethan had already dodged and moved to another angle. Each attack weakened the formation and forced the Queen to focus her attention on defense. The other enemy ships began to falter, their coordination breaking under the pressure of his precise strikes. The battle raged around him. Pilots from the colony joined in, following the plan Ethan had set. Together, they forced more ships to retreat or get disabled. Ethan felt the thrill of victory building with every move, but he knew it was far from over. The Queen was clever, and one mistake could end everything. He took a deep breath, analyzing the battlefield. He saw an opening near the flagship, a narrow path he could use to get close without getting hit. He angled his craft and sped forward, dodging laser fire and moving between explosions. His craft shook from near misses, but he stayed focused. This was the moment to make a real impact. Ethan fired his weapons at the flagship's critical points, causing alarms to blare across the Queen's ship. Her men scrambled, trying to repair damage and defend their Queen. Ethan pulled back, weaving through the chaos, and saw that the formation was now fractured. Small gaps appeared everywhere. The Queen's control was not absolute. Human men who had seemed unstoppable were now vulnerable, and Ethan had shown how to exploit their weaknesses. Breathing heavily, Ethan pulled away from the front line and regrouped with the other pilots. The scanners at the colony still showed impossible results. One pilot alone had survived and damaged a near-invincible fleet. Ethan knew he had made a difference. The Queen was still powerful, but now she had to respond to his tactics. The first steps to turning the tide were complete. The battle was far from over, but humanity had learned a valuable lesson about strategy and courage. Ethan had survived the fight, and now had the knowledge to plan the next attack. Ethan returned to the colony with his craft shaking from the maneuvers he had made. He landed and stepped out, taking a deep breath. Clara and Luke were waiting, their eyes filled with anticipation. The fight had revealed weaknesses, but it was clear the Queen's forces were still dangerous. They needed a new plan. Clara pointed to the screens showing the battle recordings. "Ethan, we can reinforce the fighters, upgrade the shields, and add new weapons. We can make them stronger and faster." Ethan nodded. "It is not just about strength. We need to think ahead, anticipate their moves, and use strategy. The Queen and her men have patterns. If we break their formation and force them to fight separately, we can win." Luke stepped forward, tapping on the console. "We can set traps in space, use the debris fields to our advantage, and coordinate attacks so their soldiers cannot support each other. Timing will be key." For the next several hours, the team worked tirelessly. Engineers upgraded fighter systems and reinforced shields. Pilots trained on simulated battle scenarios, learning how to exploit the weaknesses Ethan had found. The colony hummed with energy as everyone prepared for the next encounter. Each person knew the stakes. Failure meant destruction, but success meant survival. Ethan spent time with each pilot, going over strategies and showing them how to recognize the enemy patterns. "They move together, but they are predictable if you watch closely," he said. "Do not rely on raw power. Think, adapt, and act fast." Clara adjusted weapon calibrations, while Luke mapped attack sequences. Can force them into tight spaces where their size and strength are less effective, and we hit them with precision. They will not see it coming." Ethan agreed. The plan was dangerous, but it was their best chance. As night fell over the colony, Ethan walked along the observation deck, looking at the stars. The fleet had not moved yet, but he could sense its approach. The Queen was intelligent and powerful, but humans were resourceful. He had seen what his team could do, and he trusted them. This fight would not be easy, but they were ready. Early the next morning, alarms sounded. The fleet had advanced, and sensors indicated movement toward the outer perimeter. Ethan climbed into his fighter, feeling the familiar tension. Clara handled shields, and Luke coordinated strategies with other pilots. The team moved with precision, each knowing their role in the coming fight. The fleet appeared in the distance, massive and imposing. Energy beams streaked through space as the enemy opened fire. Ethan dodged quickly, weaving through blasts and guiding the other pilots toward the gaps they had identified. Every strike they made hit key points, forcing enemy ships to adjust and exposing weaknesses. The Queen focused on Ethan, her human men protecting her with skill. Ethan anticipated their moves and fired at weak points, causing explosions that shook the formation. His attacks were precise, coordinated with the rest of the team. One by one, enemy ships fell or were forced to retreat. The Queen's control weakened, and small errors appeared among her men. The human advantage in strategy and teamwork was becoming clear. Hours passed as the battle raged. Ethan used every maneuver he had learned, pushing his craft to its limits. Clara and Luke guided the team, keeping them alive and effective. Civilians watched from the observation decks, inspired by the courage and skill of the pilots. Finally, the team pulled back after forcing a retreat. The fleet had been damaged, but not destroyed. Ethan surveyed the field, noting the gaps and weaknesses they had created. They had learned valuable lessons, and the Queen would have to adapt. Humanity had survived another day, but the fight was far from over. Ethan knew that preparation, strategy, and teamwork would be the key to the battles ahead. Ethan Cold took a deep breath as his fighter shot into the heart of the star cluster. The fleet of human soldiers under the Queen had recovered and reorganized, but the humans from the colony were ready. Ethan led the charge, weaving through energy blasts and debris. Every movement was precise. Every attack counted. The battle had begun in full. The enemy fleet opened fire, lighting up the dark space with streaks of energy. Ethan dodged rapidly, his hands steady on the controls. He could see the Queen on the flagship, directing her men with sharp focus. Her elite soldiers moved with strength and speed, but their formation had small gaps. Ethan aimed carefully, targeting shield generators and weapon systems. Sparks flew, and alarms blared across the enemy ships. Each strike weakened the fleet and forced them to react, giving the humans an advantage. Pilots from the colony followed Ethan, attacking in coordination. Luke Hayes monitored the battle from the command center, giving instructions and timing attacks. Clara Reed handled communication and shield management, making sure every craft stayed protected. The human team moved like one body, each pilot knowing their role, each attack planned and executed with precision. Ethan weaved through enemy fire, drawing attention to himself while the others attacked the weak points. The flagship tried to adjust its position, but Ethan was always one step ahead. He launched a series of precise strikes at the rear engines of surrounding ships, causing them to drift out of formation. The Queen noticed immediately, signaling her soldiers to cover, but the human tactics had already caused confusion. The elite men could not respond fast enough, and their defenses started to crack. The battle escalated near a massive asteroid belt. Ethan used the terrain to his advantage, diving between rocks and debris, forcing enemy ships into tight spaces. Explosions rocked the formation, and several ships collided or were destroyed. The Queen's men were powerful, but they were less effective in confined areas. Ethan smiled, seeing the plan unfold perfectly. The human strategy was working. Suddenly, the Queen herself moved toward Ethan, her flagship cutting through space at high speed. Ethan adjusted his course, anticipating her attack. He fired at critical points along her ship, hitting shield nodes and causing sparks to fly. Her soldiers tried to intercept, but Ethan's maneuvers were unpredictable. Every dodge, every strike was calculated. The Queen's focus shifted entirely to defense. giving the colony's pilots opportunities to strike at the rest of her fleet. Hours passed as the celestial battle raged. Ethan pushed his craft to the limits, dodging, firing, and observing. He noted patterns and weaknesses, using every advantage he had. The enemy fleet was powerful, but the humans' ability to adapt and coordinate attacks made the difference. One by one, the Queen's ships began to falter. Explosions and debris marked their defeat, and the remaining forces scattered to regroup, then maneuvered through the chaos, targeting key systems on the flagship. He could see the Queen, human and formidable, but she was forced to respond to his attacks. The human pilots followed his lead, striking with precision and timing. Their strategy worked, and the fleet's control began to crumble. Sparks flew, alarms blared, and the enemy soldiers were pushed into retreat. Finally, Ethan pulled back, surveying the battlefield. The fleet had been severely damaged, and the Queen's control over her men was weakened. The human pilots regrouped, their crafts battered but intact. The colony's defense had held, and they had forced the enemy to retreat. Ethan knew the victory was temporary, but the lesson was clear. Humans survived not because of raw strength, but because of strategy, courage, and teamwork. The celestial battle had begun, but humanity had proven it could stand against impossible odds. Ethan Cole circled the battlefield, watching the remaining ships regroup near a dense asteroid field. The Queen and her elite men had withdrawn temporarily, but they were far from defeated. Ethan knew this was the moment to strike decisively. He relayed instructions to the colony pilots, preparing them for a precise ambush. Clara Reed monitored the shields and weapon systems, calling out openings and vulnerabilities. Luke Hayes coordinated the attack pattern, timing every maneuver so the enemy could not reinforce quickly. The human pilots were tense but focused, each one trusting Ethan's judgment and their own training. They had learned to work as one, turning individual skill into collective strength. Ethan targeted the lead ship near the Queen, weaving through asteroids and debris to approach undetected. He fired at critical systems, causing sparks and small explosions. The Queen's soldiers reacted quickly, but Ethan anticipated their moves. He dodged their counterattacks and used the terrain to force them into narrow paths where their size became a disadvantage. One by one, their ships were disabled or forced to retreat. The Queen, realizing the danger, moved forward to confront Ethan directly. Her elite men formed a protective wall, but Ethan had observed their patterns. Timing was everything. He maneuvered between their defenses, striking weak points and dodging attacks. Sparks flew and alarms blared across the flagship as systems failed. The Queen focused entirely on defense, leaving gaps for other pilots to exploit. Human pilots pressed their advantage, attacking ships that had been left vulnerable. Each strike was precise, coordinated with Ethan's movements. The fleet began to fracture, its formation collapsing under pressure. Ethan used the chaos to push closer to the Queen, keeping her occupied while the rest of the fleet suffered critical damage. Clara's voice came through the cum. "Ethan, the shields are holding. You can make the final strike if you time it right." He nodded, feeling the rush of determination. He had trained for moments like this, but the reality was more intense. Every maneuver mattered, and one mistake could mean disaster. He adjusted his trajectory, aiming for the flagship's weak spot. The Queen's men tried to intercept, but Ethan had predicted their moves. He dodged a sudden blast and fired at a critical node. The explosion rocked the flagship, causing alarms to scream and systems to fail. Her soldiers scrambled to repair the damage, but Ethan pressed the attack, keeping her focused on defense. Sparks and debris flew around him, but he remained steady, calculating every action. The enemy fleet began to scatter. As the Queen struggled to regain control, human pilots pushed forward, disabling more ships and forcing a retreat. Ethan continued to maneuver near the flagship, drawing attention while the colony's pilots struck with precision. The Queen's men were powerful, but coordination and strategy were failing under relentless pressure. Finally, Ethan saw the opportunity. The flagship's defenses were down in one sector. He fired with precision, causing a major system failure. The Queen's focus shifted entirely to saving her ship, leaving her men exposed. Ethan pulled back slightly, giving the other pilots a chance to strike the remaining ships. One by one they were disabled, and the Queen's control weakened further. The Queen was forced to surrender, realizing that continued resistance would cost everything. Ethan's skill and strategy had forced her hand, proving that humans could survive against overwhelming odds. The remaining fleet retreated, and the colony breathed a sigh of relief. Ethan and his team had turned the tide of the battle. Humanity had survived through courage, intelligence, and teamwork, showing that no force could overcome a united and determined human spirit. Ethan Cole watched the remnants of the enemy fleet retreat into the distance. The battle had ended, and the Queen had surrendered. The human pilots returned to the colony, their craft scratched and battered, but intact. Every pilot felt a mix of relief and exhaustion. The star cluster was quiet again, but the victory was alive in their hearts. Clara Reed met Ethan at the landing pad. "You did it," she said, her eyes shining with pride. "We all did it together, but your strategy led the fight." Ethan nodded, feeling the weight of the battle. The Queen had been formidable, but humanity's skill and courage had prevailed. The colonies had survived, and a new respect for human ingenuity had been earned. Luke Hayes joined them, reviewing the damage reports. "The fleet is damaged beyond repair. The Queen's men will need time to recover. We bought the colonies a chance to rebuild. We have shown that humans cannot be underestimated." Ethan smiled, knowing the truth in Luke's words. Survival was never about power alone. It was about adaptability, intelligence, and teamwork. The Queen and her elite men were escorted to a secure facility within the colony. They were human, formidable, and disciplined, but now they were under observation. Ethan observed them from a distance, noting the mix of pride and respect in their eyes. They recognized human determination and strategy. The encounter had taught them a lesson about courage and unity. Ethan walked through the colony, watching engineers repair damage and civilians rebuild structures. The human spirit was evident everywhere. People worked together, determined to restore what was lost and prepare for whatever might come next. Every street and tower reflected resilience and hope. The victory had not just been in battle, but in proving that humans could face impossible odds and survive. In the command center, Ethan reviewed the battle data with Clara and Luke. They analyzed the Queen's tactics, the weaknesses they had exploited, and the coordination that had led to victory. The lessons would guide future defenses and ensure that the colonies were better prepared. Knowledge and strategy had become as important as weapons and shields. Humanity had learned to adapt and overcome. Ethan stood on the observation deck, looking at the stars. The fleet had retreated far into the distance, and the star cluster glimmered peacefully. He reflected on the battles, the maneuvers, and the courage of the pilots. Humans survived because they thought, adapted, and worked together. Strength was important, but intelligence and unity had made the difference. The colonies had survived, and humanity had proven its power beyond any scanner's understanding. Civilians gathered to celebrate, cheering for the pilots and the courage that had saved them. Ethan watched quietly, knowing that the real victory was in survival and resilience. The Queen's surrender marked the end of the immediate threat, but humanity had learned a vital lesson. They were not just survivors. They were fighters, thinkers, and strategists, capable of facing any challenge. As night fell, Ethan walked through the colony streets, seeing families reunited, engineers working, pilots preparing for the future. The sense of unity and determination was palpable. Every person had played a role, and together they had overcome what had seemed impossible. Ethan felt a sense of pride, knowing that the human spirit had triumphed. Finally, he returned to his quarters, sitting quietly and reflecting on the events. The battle had tested skill, courage, and strategy. The Queen had been strong, but humanity had shown that intelligence, teamwork, and perseverance were stronger. Ethan knew that the colonies would continue to thrive, and that humans could face any challenge with courage and ingenuity. Humanity had survived the celestial battle, and a new era of strength, respect, and unity had begun.